So I watched a video last night by John, by Emblem of Being, about social networks. And this, I think he's an MD, a doctor. Uh, Dr. Christakis gave a TED talk about the power of social networks in our modern day civilization or society. And, it struck me that, basically what Christakis is offering is the idea that relationships are just as real as individuals, and that to a large extent, uh, our personal lives are determined by our friends. In the sense that much of our identity is not inwardly constituted, but emerges as a result of our interaction with others and the world around us. And this is well, it shouldn't be shocking, but it's not something we often acknowledge. I think it's obvious once you notice it. But then again, there also seems to be a need to individuate and to recognize your own willful participation or lack of participation in what constitutes these networks, these relationships. So the self is constituted by its relationships, by others, but others and relationships are also constituted by the self. So there's an interplay going on here. And one way we could try to talk about what's going on here and the dynamics involved is to think of different bodies. There are certain social bodies that we as individuals are embedded within. And I do think that at times there are what we could call downward causative effects upon the parts as a result of the whole of this larger social body. And in that sense, we're determined by the networks that we exist within. But on the other hand, a similar situation is going on with all the cells in our own organism. And I think here it becomes obvious that a human being is more than just a physical body, though. What it is that makes us persons, that gives us personality, seems to be more than the body that's made of the elements that we have mapped on the periodic table. And some would say that one's personality, one's consciousness is the result of neurochemicals or electrical activity in the brain. But that's not what we interact with when we enter into a relationship or just have a conversation with somebody else. We're not interacting with neurochemicals, we're interacting with a person. So there's something beyond the physical body, the visible form that we encounter, to which we are responding to when we interact with another human being. And we could call that the soul, or theosophists call it, or anthroposophists, or various spiritual traditions would refer to it as the astral body. It is where the ego resides, where various psychological, archetypal forms and characters reside. It's not a physical place. It's a mode of relation, a mode of realization that occurs on the level of emotions and images. It occurs on a mental plane, which isn't visible to the physical senses, but which can be deeply felt and experienced on the supersensory, non-physical or spiritual plane. And I think when we're talking about social networks, these sorts of spiritual planes become increasingly relevant, because just like you can't see a so-called social organism, you can't see the larger uh, mind that we are embedded within as individuals, and yet its effects can be felt. We notice its effects every day. I mean, the money in our wallets is a result or an effect of a larger social organism within which we are embedded and by which we are determined. Our language is another example. My own ability to think about myself, at least so far as that thought occurs in a public language, is a gift. That ability is a gift I receive from my society. Language is an organism within which I and the rest of us are embedded. Even to say I am, I've got to speak a language. And so we see how we're always already other than ourselves. We're always already implicated in networks and other kinds of bodies than our own. And yet each of us is still responsible for holding our own, for living up to the obligations and the responsibilities that we have to one another. It's a fascinating dialectic, this web of reality that we each exist within. It's painful, it's pleasurable, it's exciting and frightening. It's definitely full of potential, though, as well. And when I say that social networks are full of potential, I think specifically of some of Teilhard de Chardin's ideas concerning the noosphere, the omega point, and Christogenesis, as he calls it, where the noosphere begins to awaken to itself and transforms individual egoic consciousness into a form of not ego dissolution, but the sort of personality that lives to love and that relates to others, knowing that each self and other are related to one another within the mind of God, that we are literally the neurons in Mother Earth's nervous system. We are the brain. We are the soul. Teilhard talks about the within of things and not just their outside. So we're not just neurons, we are the experience, the cognitive, emotive, moral experience of the earth. So far, or so long as we are aware of it, of our embeddedness in a larger organism called the human species, and ultimately in a larger organism called Gaia, or the living earth, which is embedded in the sun. We're all every planet in our solar system is just basically in the sun's atmospheres. So, and then the Milky Way galaxy, we're embedded one body within the next. But because we live in a universe that's not just physical, it's not the size of the body which counts, but the complexity, which is another idea that Teilhard really develops. So human beings very well could be the whole point of not just human beings, but life in general, at the sort of middle place in terms of size. When you think of the physical, the infinitely large and the infinitesimally small, life and intelligence emerges right in the middle of those two extremes. So we seem to be the whole point, like the massive cosmos and the microcosm of subatomic particles seem to all be working to provide that fertile ground in between where this can happen. But yeah, networks.